Russia faces new sanctions if peace talks fail. United States Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent warned that Washington's decision to impose new sanctions against Russia will depend on the progress of peace talks after the end of Russia's war against Ukraine, and Washington has already prepared a new package of sanctions. Meanwhile, the European Union is discussing replacing the price cap on Russian oil with a ban on providing shadow fleet tankers with shipping services, from insurance to port maintenance. This measure is set for the 20th European Union sanctions package, but it's important to note that the European Union is proposing to fully synchronize sanctions with the United States in order to finally destroy Vladimir Putin's shadow fleet. This will lead to a catastrophic collapse in oil revenues, but even the sanctions that have already been imposed are having a very significant effect. Reliance Industries, the largest private company in India, started buying oil from Venezuela after Trump and Modi made a new deal. It is reported that the Indian oil refining conglomerate acquired a supertanker with a cargo of about 2 million barrels in the Venezuelan region, and as they say, this was the first shipment. If everything goes well, Venezuelan and American oil will replace Russian oil. So let's discuss the topic of oil sanctions right now. I'm Alexei Pechi, let's discuss this together. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, like the video, leave any comment under this episode, and subscribe to my Telegram channel, Pechi News. The link to it is in the description of this video. There we publish breaking news as it comes in. So, United States Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent warned that Washington's decision to impose new sanctions against Russia will depend on the progress of peace talks to end Russia's war against Ukraine. Next is his quote, "Let's see where the peace talks will lead. Further restrictive measures may also affect ships involved in transporting Russian oil." Recent sanctions against Russia's oil sector have already contributed to Moscow's participation in the negotiation process. United States Presidential Special Representative Stephen Witkoff in turn stated that the talks in Abu Dhabi involving delegations from the United States, Russia, and Ukraine were constructive. According to him, the parties discussed a ceasefire and a monitoring mechanism, agreeing to continue the dialogue in the coming week. That's interesting. So even Merov has already talked about this. And there are more and more insider reports suggesting that they might try to suspend hostilities, not stop them completely, but pause them for a while. At least while substantive negotiations on a peace agreement are underway. Witkoff also noted that restoring the communication channel between the United States and Russian military, which was closed in 2021, is crucial for achieving peace. On the Washington side, the dialogue will be led by General Alexus Grinkovich, the commander of the United States European Command. At the same time, Bloomberg writes that the administration of United States President Donald Trump has already prepared new sanctions against Russia, but is not rushing to implement them yet. And at the same time, experts say that recently Moscow, having failed to achieve results on the battlefield, has increased pressure on Kiev and is trying to force Ukraine to accept a bad deal through massive strikes on the energy sector, while Ukraine is experiencing severe frosts. But Washington began preparing new sanctions against Russia in case peace talks failed, as it turned out back in December. In particular, measures are being considered against shadow fleet vessels used to transport oil by sea, and sanctions against traders facilitating the sale of Russian oil. United States Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent discussed these plans at a meeting with a group of European ambassadors, and this is a very important point. It is worth mentioning that in recent weeks, the United States and the European Union have been working on synchronizing their sanctions policy towards the Russian Federation, and this could work right now. The European Union is discussing replacing the price cap on Russian oil with a ban on providing shadow fleet tankers with shipping services, from insurance to port maintenance. In other words, to make them, as they say, persona non grata, unwelcome. This measure will be part of the 20th European Union sanctions package effective in February. The European Commission has also started consultations on this measure with its G7 partners. And now in Brussels, they state that the joint ban with the United States of America on maritime services could deal a new blow to the revenues of Russia's energy sector. And I should note here that just the other day, the Washington Post wrote about this, saying that a sharp decline in oil sales revenue is already being forecast in Russia, after 14 European countries announced that they would track and seize shadow fleet tankers appearing in the Baltic Sea. They say the era when these ships could pass through the Baltic Sea while Europeans simply turned a blind eye is over. They claim they have the right to seize these tankers, and several have already turned back to Russia. And so, the price cap introduced by the G7, the big G7 at the end of 2022, as you remember, limited the price of Russian oil to $60 per barrel. What did they mean by that? What they meant was that European and American insurers, who control 90% of the global marine insurance market, and other companies were prohibited from providing any services. If oil was supplied at a price above this cap, meaning if some tanker was transporting oil and selling it above the price cap, then no one was allowed to work with it. No financial services, no insurance services, no repairs, nothing. And in September 2025, the European Union, along with the United Kingdom, Canada, Japan, and Australia, lowered this cap to $47.6, and recently they lowered it even further to $44 per barrel. A price cap is just that. It's generally good, but not always effective. The Trump administration, by the way, didn't follow their example. Now Brussels is trying to coordinate its actions on sanctions against the Russian shadow fleet with the White House. And as the Financial Times writes, the ban was discussed with American officials. As you know, Besson says he met with the Europeans. And in the European Union, they insist that the ban on shipping services has a number of advantages. It can significantly increase the cost for suppliers of Russian oil. It's easier to implement. You won't have to analyze a lot of documents that carriers forge in order to, on paper, show that the price matches the declared cap. So, give us insurance. Coordinating such actions with Washington will increase their effectiveness, according to Brussels. That's why they say, let's synchronize, and that's it. The president of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, stated this Friday that the new European Union sanctions will include a complete ban on providing services to carriers of Russian oil, as well as restrictive measures for a number of metals and chemicals. Here's a quote. This will further reduce Russia's energy revenues and make it harder to find buyers for its oil. Since shipping is a global business, we propose to introduce a complete ban in coordination with like-minded partners after decisions are made by the G7. And it's important to note here that more than a third of Russian oil is exported on Western tankers using Western transport services. The new ban will put an end to this trade, which is mainly carried out using fleets from European countries such as Greece, Cyprus, and Malta. And here I'll quote from a study by the Brookings Institution. Carefully coordinated, targeted, and legally indisputable sanctions from Europe will give Ukraine additional leverage in negotiations with Russia, increasing the chances of achieving a just and lasting peace. European politicians who want to help Ukraine as well as protect their own countries must act decisively to ensure the effectiveness of the sanctions. Regarding tankers of the Russian shadow fleet, it is worth convincing the countries where these tankers are registered to require ships flying their flags to have adequate insurance, in case it is absent. European countries can refuse entry to such tankers into their seas, including the Baltic and Black Seas. But in the meantime, American sanctions are working. Reliance Industries, the largest private company in India, has started buying oil from Venezuela. Bloomberg reported this today. This happened after Trump announced a new trade deal between the United States and India. And now the oil refining conglomerate has acquired its first supertanker carrying about 2 million barrels of Venezuelan crude. And I should note here that it was this company, Reliance Industries, that became the largest Indian importer of Russian oil after the start of Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine. As of the end of 2025, it accounted for about half of the volumes purchased from Russia. In other words, about half went to this company alone. In December 2024, this company also signed a 25-year contract with Rosneft for the supply of up to 500,000 barrels of oil per day. But after Washington imposed sanctions against LUKOIL and Rosneft at the end of October last year, Reliance Industries announced that they would no longer buy Russian oil. That 25-year contract can now be thrown away. New opportunities for diversifying purchases appeared for Indian companies after the United States seized the exotic. And so in January, Reuters sources reported that Reliance was negotiating with the United States to get permission to purchase Venezuelan oil. And it's important to understand that the world's largest oil refining complex in Jamnagar, owned by this company, is very well suited for processing heavy, high-sulfur crude from Venezuela. Moreover, the thing is that until 2019, this Indian oil refining complex operated exclusively on Venezuelan oil. After switching to Russian oil, returning to Venezuelan oil shouldn't be hard. So the European Union and the United States have every chance by coordinating their sanctions policy to destroy Russia's oil revenues. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. If you found this episode interesting and useful, you can support the work of this YouTube channel with any donation or subscription using the links and details in the description of this video. I would appreciate any support from you. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.